Hey everybody, today we are going to learn about high dynamic range imaging, or HDRI. HDRI is a really cool way to utilize a photograph to help you light elements in your scene. It is oftentimes referred to as image-based lighting. So let's go ahead and get started. Here I have on my viewport, I have a simple kind of fruit bowl model, very basic, very basic plane for the ground plane. If I zoom out here, you guys can see what I have. And that's part of the other lesson, which we're going to get to, so I'm going to delete that. I'm going to go ahead and turn on this viewport, the little blue ball here, the resolution gate, and that's going to give me a nice kind of locked resolution, and I dig that. That's going to be really nice. All right, image-based lighting utilizes a few factors that we've already gone over, one of which, and I'm going to save this off real quick, one of which is final gather. So we're going to use final gathering here just a bit to get a really nice smooth render. Now I'm going to start this demo with no materials. These are basically Lambert 1 materials, and I'm going to add more and more materials so you can see how realistically this element works as we go forward. Alright, now that we have our model and we're all good to go on that, what we're going to do now is set up our rendering. Now this is a mental ray renderer, so remember, to open Mental Ray, you have to go to Settings and Preferences and Plugin Manager. You'll navigate to the bottom, and you're going to use Maya to Mental Ray Bundle. And you're going to make sure that's loaded, and I'm going to auto-load mine just to be safe. I'm going to go into my render settings, or my render globals, and open those up, and I'm going to make sure my default render is set to Mental Ray. Now, one of the other things I do is I want to make sure my quality of my render is very high and very sharp. So I'm going to go to Presets, and I'm going to do Load Preset, go in here, and say Production. So I'm going to load the Production preset. Alright, that's going to give me everything I need. Now I have to play around with some things. Just like Final Gathering, we have to turn off the Enable Default Lighting. So I'm going to uncheck that, otherwise the result will not be as accurate as you would like. Now I'm going to go over to Features, and I'm going to turn on Final Gather. Alright, now if you've done the production settings, everything else should be really pretty decently turned on. Alright, so I'm going to hop over to indirect lighting, and I'm going to make sure my final gather is on, and I'm going to go ahead and just keep it default settings for now. We'll go ahead and play with these in a second. And as with all final gather, we have to go into our attribute editor, and we have to turn our environment. We're going to shade it just a little lighter, and we're going to just run a quick final gather to see what we have. Now I have a warning message. It's not a big deal to me. But overall, that looks pretty good. It's pretty dark, but I know that my dome that I put in will really lighten the scene, so I'm not too worried about that. Now, to get our domes, what we're going to need, and I have given you this final gather thing on your canvas, but we're going to need to look up Light Probe. So Light Probe Gallery. And Paul Debevec is one of the four founders of this image-based lighting. He's taught many courses at SIGGRAPH and whatnot. He's kind of the who's who of renderers and lighters and computer scientists that help work with this. And what we're going to do is we're going to grab one of these image-based lightings. So you're going to want to download the HDR format. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to grab this one called the Kitchen Probe. It's the angular map. And I'm going to save that file. So I'm going to hit OK. And that's going to go to my desktop. And I'm going to hop back into Maya. And now we're going to build this file. Now this gives you a .hdr extension. You can't really open that up elsewhere but in Maya here. So what we're going to do to start is go back to our render settings, and in the same place where we find Final Gather, you'll find image-based lighting. So we're going to go ahead and hit Create. Now what does that do? Well, you can't really see it right now, but if I zoom out here, it gives me a big dome. It gives me a world, and that world is going to act as an environment, and that's going to be really special. So once that world is highlighted, you saw it's in yellow, I can go ahead and play with my IBL attributes, or image-based lighting attributes. So for my image name, I'm going to just go ahead and click the folder, and I'm going to zoom in here, or zoom out here, excuse me. And I'm going to navigate, and I'm going to look. I have a lot in here. I'm going to go to that Kitchen Probe we downloaded. There it is. We can change the mapping type to angle or spherical. So if you, let me zoom in here so you can see that's angular, that's spherical. Now, it said on the IBL website, some of you have noticed it was an angular map. That's why I knew to set the mapping to angular. Everything else is going to stay the same. All right, so that's our default map. Now, Final Gather is turned on. I don't have to turn on anything else. Everything else is set for now. Now, the quality is going to be the thing that we need to tweak here in a second. So let's go ahead and do a quick render here and see what our result is. All right. First thing you see is this is way overblown. This image, this light that's emitting from this image that we've used is washing out our whole scene. So we have a few options that we need to take to get this correct. All right, so let's get started on that. Now, one of them is like a dimmer switch. If you've ever been in a fancy dining room and you have a little dimmer switch that softens the light, we have that here as well, and that's under the color gain attribute. So I can lower the color gain quite low, and we can see what it does there. You can see it makes a huge difference. Now what you're probably noticing is some splotches. Do you guys see those splotches in here? That's a common thing, and that's something you're going to fight with this. That has to do with your Final Gather. Sometimes it has to do with the lower resolution of your HDRI map. So I'm kind of playing around with my settings. I'm going to go back to my camera, and I'm going to lighten my environment for my Final Gather. And it's a give or take here. This is not going to smooth out immediately because I haven't upped any values when it comes to the actual render settings. So let's go ahead and hop back in and do that. Let's up our value to 500. We'll up our point density to 5. And we're going to turn on 1 secondary diffuse bounce, which isn't going to play a huge part right now because we don't have materials, but let's see what this does overall. So you can see it's already a denser kind of blotchiness by just changing those settings. Now we're going to still get blotchiness here. This isn't going to be a perfect solve, but I just want to show you guys how amazing this actually can look. So you can see the lighting is pretty good. We have a shadow already cast out here, which is pretty amazing. We'll go through this, and the blotchiness is a little lower. We're getting there. It's a lot nicer for us to kind of play around with. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add one more light source. I'm going to create a directional light. Hit 7 on my keyboard. Kind of move this up and then move this back a little bit. And I want this directional light to act as if, let's rotate it down, there it is, just as another light source. I'm going to go ahead and turn my shadows on as well. We'll do 15 and we'll do something really blurry like 30 to kind of blur that out. And let's see what we have now. So immediately when I put that light in, this is going to take a little longer to render. These renders can take quite a bit of time. Now, the trick that you guys are going to have to learn is learning how to play with your Final Gather settings. Now, some of you may have already read the Final Gather settings setup that I've given you, and it kind of explains each one. I have some values in here sometimes that help. We're going to try this one real quick. We're going to lower the settings to see what happens in a few minutes here. But basically, these settings are trial and error, and that's essentially, there's no guarantee that it's going to look amazing. I suggest rendering, fast previews for your light and then kind of working up. And this is getting almost done. That's why it popped off here. You can see it's getting a lot more smooth. Now, this is going to change. If I go in and I change my dome, so I'm going to go in here and grab that IBL shape, and I'm going to put another dome I've been using, which this is RNL probe. This is a totally different picture, and I'm going to put that in. And if I render this out, you're going to notice a big change. I'm going to give it a few minutes here to kind of go through and get out. So depending on the probe, it changes the values. We're going through, and again, I have my color gain set pretty low. I could up that value at any point. All these values are harmonious with one another when you're working through it. This probe's giving me a little softer light, and I dig that a little bit better. Go through. We're going to get some blotchiness. I don't see a terrible amount coming up. Yeah, it's starting to fade out a little bit with this probe. This is a nicer probe. It's a higher resolution probe, so we're not getting as much. So that's looking really good with that new probe. Now, we can do a lot of different cool things here. We can, utilize some of the settings we had. So we can kind of go in here and play with these settings, see what happens. I think we had, you guys probably remember this more than me, 0.1 there, and then we had 15. So again, learn what these settings are, read that article, read the help, and we're going to kind of see if that speeds up our render. And you can see it terrifically speeds up the render. That's a lot nicer. So that works. So again, your settings, Mentor is interesting because basically what this is telling us is all these settings are dependent on basically how big your objects are in your scene. So if I had a really huge bowl of fruit that was like the size of a house, it most likely would take higher numbers. But here, those lower numbers, because my element is about the size of the grid, worked perfectly fine. And you don't see much of a difference. It is there, trust me, there is a difference there. But overall, it's rather nice. So let's go back to the light here. I want to play around with this a little more. I want to up that just slightly. Maybe we'll get a little more atmosphere. We'll go back to that IBL probe. And I'm going to show you one more cool thing here in a second. I'm going to up the light here. I don't want it to be too bright. Let's see what we get now when we start making the scene brighter. And this is default Lambert materials. There's nothing terribly special with this, and it works rather well. So at times, depending on what you change, it's a finicky thing, mental ray. You possibly could tweak a setting like I may have just done that decides to crash your computer. Now mine is still in rendering mode here, so I just kind of gotta, egg that on. And my best bet, and the problem that I'm doing that's confusing Maya, is I have a few other things open. I'm clicking when I shouldn't be clicking just for this recording and mistake like that. So what you can see here is this is totally kind of frozen my computer, and that happens. And I don't really avoid these when I do my videos for you guys, just because this is going to happen to you. I did save it in the beginning of the scene, so I can force quit this. I can open that up rather quickly, throw a few more settings on, and we'll be good. There's our fruit. And close this up. Make sure we have our thing. Close that down. Cool. So easy breezy, not a hard fix. I don't really let it bother me. I'm so used to it now. It's just something that kind of happens. Image-based lighting. Let's go to my desktop. Let's try Lake Crater Probe. That was a really kind of neat looking one. Here we can do 256. We had 0.1. We had 15. This will blur it, this point interpolation. We had 1. So we're going to use that. And I think we're going to stick with that for now. We're going to see what this ends up looking like. Again, my ultimate goal, kind of sounds funny, is to try to crash this thing as much as possible. Really learn the ins and outs of it. Here we need a brighter environment. So go back to my final gather. Go to my environment, tweak it maybe halfway. Give it a run there. Now, one of the cool things I wanted to show you is there's actually ability to use the image probe to light your scene. You can actually use it to create physical lights in the scene. And this is kind of amazing. So let me show you this. This is a really dark probe. I'm going to go ahead and highlight. I'm going to go to my focus here. I'm going to focus on that shape. And I'm going to go to light emission. Now this is really cool. I'm going to lower this just for demo's sake. This is kind of the power of the light. Check this out. I'm going to go ahead and turn this on now. And what's going to happen is you're going to start seeing shadows. And this is really cool. What this is doing is creating, with all the high points and low and shadows, highlights and shadows of that picture, it's calculating them and treating them as those were actual light and actual shadow casting light. Before it wasn't really shadow casting, it was just kind of giving us a tone to the overall piece. So here you can see it's really quite cool. I'm using this probe to kind of shadow this out. I'll zoom away here in a second so you can see when this render is done, so you can see what we've done. And that's a really cool trick as well. And that's found essentially if you just grab the big IBL shape that you've created, the shape there. Now you're going to see I have some issues here. What's happening here is not because of my lighting. This is mainly because of the material I've chosen to use. So just ignore that. I've smoothed this bowl probably 2 times just to get a decent smooth display, and that's kind of why I'm getting what you're seeing. Again, the higher numbers would get rid of, in the final gather, would get rid of these splotches here, and there's that IBL shape that I was talking about that emits the light. So that's all fine and dandy. We're going to go back to our trusty old R&L probe. I dig that one even though it crashed it. I'm going to save this out here. And I'm going to do an angular file. I like that. This is pretty cool. It's kind of like a foresty one. All right, so now that I have that, we can play with materials a little bit. Let's do a quick render just to make sure that I'm totally not off base with this. It's a little bright. I dig it though. I can handle it. It's an outside probe. If I want to turn that power down, remember, I just go into my different settings for my final gather and whatnot, and it starts kind of darkening it up a little bit. I can also darken this up by going to the IBL probe and playing with the color gain in the image-based lighting attributes. I kind of like working from dark to light. I'm not a huge fan of working with light to dark just because it tends to kind of mess up. By the way, let's save this off real quick. Let me show you this light emission here with using this probe. See, we're going to get a lot of light because there's a lot of light up there. You can see it just totally blew it out, so I'd have a lot more work to do here in this. Totally blowing this out is more of an understatement. This thing is like washed out completely. So we have a lot of work to do if we're going to use that. So most likely I would not, on this one, kind of use that emit light function, so I'm going to hit escape and kind of get out of there. Let's go back to the IBL shape and let's turn that off. All right. So I want to make sure I have a few things. I may still have my enable light off. That's good. I want to make sure that I'm on higher res. This is kind of cool. Your sample options. I'm going to set mine to Mitchell here. That's a nicer blur to the overall thing. It's nice. All right. So let me show you some cool materials. Let's start with the floor. Instead of using Lamberts and blends, which I can totally use, we're going to start by throwing those in. But I want to use some mental ray materials, and they're really, really helpful in scenes like this. So I'm going to go to my hypershade. I'm going to open this up, and you can see I had already, materials made for like your Apple and things like that. If I did a blend and threw a blend on this table, that would give me reflectivity. We all know reflectivity gives us reflections, blend gives us reflections, and when I do that, you'll see something like this. Really pretty, right? It's a simple Maya standard material. We have options for mental ray. You can see one of those options is reflection blur. So I'm going to up that reflection blur, and I'm going to play with this. And I can use these, and they'll work great. You can see now it's kind of a glassy, frosted glass look. This is a really fun kind of thing to play with to start out. You need to understand these materials first before you can kind of go in and understand the materials of other objects. But Maya and mental ray, most importantly, make their own materials. So where Maya has their blend, if I assign a new material here, mental ray also has materials. And one of the coolest ones is MIA Material X. So Mia Material X. This Mia Material X, I like to use the Mia Material X passes down the road. Once you learn more things about Maya, that will help you. It's the same thing, but this one works with render passes better. So I'm going to pull that in. I'm going to go to this shader, and at first glance, it's not that amazing. Let's look at what we get. It almost looks exactly the same. And that's mainly probably because I didn't apply it yet. So I'm going to go back and go to my hyper shade, middle click, and drag that on. Now we're cooking. There we go. Move that out. Let's see what we got. Yeah, it looks just like the blend. Nothing special. But the cool thing about this is the presets. When you use the MIA or the Mia material, what you can do is have tons of presets. We have glass, we have ceramic, we have plastic, pearl. So we're going to replace this with a pearl finish. And that kind of plays around with it. I'm going to change the color to do like a grayish, maybe a grayish red or purple or pink. Just something a little different. That's going to look so hideous. Let's go more natural tones. Go ahead and render this out. Let's see what we get. This is our preset. Look at this. Tell me, is that cool or what? Now, again, it's going to probably freeze. My computer is running. Every time I see it cut at 25% and do this, it freezes out. That's not a big deal. We can go ahead and just reboot Maya if need be. We don't want to save that because it's crashing on us. Let's get a nice render with that material. Again, I save often, frequently. I make sure that, you know, all that stuff is in order, and you can see I saved it smartly with all that. All right, let's go back and let's add a new material. Gotta make sure I select this. There we go. New material, and we'll go to materials, X passes, hop over, and what do we do? Pearl finish. I like that pearl finish. I made it like an off yellow that ended up being the taupe. There we go. Let's take a look at this now and see what we get. Oh, some changes I forgot to kind of go through. One, I probably had that emit light turned on. I bet you I did. Give this a few seconds to kind of abort. There we go. I'm just hitting the escape key there. And let's focus on some of this. Color gain, light emission. Yeah, that's why. Turn that guy off. There we go. See what we got here in our features. Everything looks good. I'm going to save this out so it works. Cross your fingers to see if this works. See if we don't get stuck. Otherwise, that material will not be used. There we go. Now we're getting some sort of pearl glossy finish. That's kind of neat. And I could change this. That's a great thing about this material, is I can go into here. Let me zoom in enough here. Close this render. And if I really want to start playing with these passes, I can kind of go to reflectivity. I can open that up a little bit, or glossiness, give it a little glossiness. Let's go ahead and re-render and see what we get. Now we're getting some nice, soft, subtle reflections. So it's looking a little bit more like a countertop of some sort. So this is really nice to have. These are really good materials. Again, I can add another one here. I'll attempt to add a glass because most people are going to be all freaking out over the glass materials. So I'm going to add one to the bowl, and let's do frosted glass. I'm going to do kind of a side view here. It's like this frosted glass bowl in the middle of the woods. Makes no sense whatsoever. Now, I don't have any other lights in the scene, so this glass is going to look as good as it can by default. Right now, it's not looking too bad. It's kind of a thick glass. I would play with the refractivity and reflections and all that fun stuff, and the index of refraction to help get the weight of that glass down. But overall, it's starting to look pretty good. So I like that. I'm going to hit escape. I highly suggest you use your test rendering resolution on this. Render really tiny, render regions. That will help. That looks really good, actually. I'm digging that. I'm not a big fan of that color, so I'm going to attempt to break the machine one more time. Kind of get an earthy tone glass color in there. We'll see what that looks like. If that looks bad, I'm not worried. Let's create another light. Let's do a point light. Hit 7 on our keyboard, move it up. Just have a nice little light. We'll hit some decay on it. Hit 15, just because I felt like typing 15. We'll do our 15 and our 30. And let's see what we get now. So we start introducing lights back into the scene to really get that photorealistic look that we're looking for. Now, again, I have higher render settings on here, but overall my renders are not taking a terrible amount of time. Your renders, if you're not rendering in HD, that's another story, that's going to be longer, shouldn't take more than a few minutes. So you can see with the glass, because of the translucency and transparency, it absolutely takes a few more kind of minutes, and it takes a little more time to calculate around that. So you can see what my point light did. It started creating this blown out, kind of washed out highlight. And it could really start utilizing lights and light linking and things like that we learned in the lighting lessons to realistically give us some photorealistic renderings. So that's pretty cool stuff. We're going to let this kind of run through just because it's glass. And again, if I turn that glass off, I'm going to hit abort here, the escape key, and I go back to my presets. I can change this. I can make this chrome. I can make it glossy plastic. We'll do that. That will be a lot faster probably. Oh yeah. Look at the speed change in that. A lot quicker. So this is the basic idea behind HDRI. You don't want blotches. You don't want tons of weird shadows. You just want it to be kind of laid back and mellow with the lighting. So it gives it that, almost photorealistic look. Now here I don't have textures. When I introduce textures to this scene tile, I can start making it look more realistic. And see how long this render took. I think it's over a minute. Yeah, about 40 seconds. That's not too bad. And that's at 640 by 480. So HD would take a couple minutes to do. I hope you guys learned something here and you kind of have understood this crazy world that is image-based lighting, HDRI imagery, and all of that. And we're going to be using this to light our scenes and get that awesome photorealistic look. So I will catch you guys next time.